My first marriage was short-lived, only extending over a period of 6 months. Na and I began our romantic journey in sophomore year of high school and shared our first moment of intimacy on the night we graduated. We tied the knot after completing college, supported both financially and emotionally by my family. They welcomed her as their own, largely because she became a constant presence at our home after her mother died. Prior to each other, neither of us had been in another relationship or had intimate experiences, at least that was true for me. Na was quite innocent, treating every piece of advice from Cosmo magazine as absolute truth. She might not have been the sharpest person around, but I believe my intelligence compensated for the both of us. This turned out to be a misjudgment. Undeniably, she was charming and probably possessed a stronger sexual drive than any other woman in the vicinity. There were evenings she left me utterly spent, though I never voiced any complaints. Nina was very close to her father and did not have a strong relationship with her mother, leading to feelings of remorse after her mother committed suicide in our 3rd year of college. The tragedy of her mother's death was compounded when, within a year, Nina's father remarried a woman who had a clear disdain for Na. This woman, Na claimed, eliminated all existing photographs of Na and her deceased mother, claiming the space for her own and replacing them with images of her biological children. Nina's father sided with his new wife, effectively excluding Nina from family events like Thanksgiving, as her stepmother declared these as family-only occasions, effectively disqualifying Na. Consequently, Nina and I eloped, never to see her father again, barred by the actions of her stepmother. The loss of both her parents deeply affected Na, despite my attempts to console her with love, attention and frequent visits to her favorite ice cream parlor. After graduation, I landed a position in a Philadelphia advertising agency as a copywriter, with my spouse joining the team as an artist. We both enjoyed our work and colleagues, although my wife seemed to find more joy in it than I did. On any given Monday, the office buzzed with people sharing tales of their weekend debauchery, often hungover. Being in the advertising field, I knew to take these stories with a grain of salt, recognizing most were embellished or outright lies. Yet my wife was entranced by these scandalous stories, especially those from the women, comparing their adventures to Taylor Swift's chart toppers. I ignored these narratives, but my wife was mesmerized. Some co-workers taunted her loyalty, tempting her to seek experiences beyond our marriage, praising the virtues of their preferred country and western bar known for its authentic cowboys. They described monogamy as tedious and flaunted their escapades and sexually transmitted infections as if they were accolades. They persuaded her that seeking experiences outside our marriage would inexplicably enhance our bond and happiness. When Na broached this topic, I assumed she was jesting and dismissed it, calling her impressionable. This reaction only infuriated her. She contended that my ability to answer trivia on Jeopardy was not equivalent to true wisdom, just a sharp memory. One Saturday, after I had just washed the car, she emerged dressed provocatively in a red dress, short in length and plunging in neckline, eschewing both bra and underwear. It was clear she wished to venture out and subsequently indulge in romantic activities. Her intentions were unmistakable, and I was fully willing to participate. Upon my request for a moment to prepare and dress up, she informed me of her plans to go dancing without me with her workmates, and she might not come back until late that night or even Sunday. "You're kidding, right?" I asked. She shook her head in denial. "Have you gone mad?" I exclaimed. She cried, apologizing, expressing that I was not fulfilling her sexually, and that she felt an overwhelming urge to explore sexually with another man, or perhaps multiple men. She explained that after listening to her friends, she too craved a cowboy. "Where in the world are you going to find a real cowboy in downtown Philadelphia?" I asked. "And you're willing to sleep with someone just because they wear a cowboy hat?" I pressed further. She believed that this adventure would somehow benefit me as well. She would return as a more experienced lover. She stood her ground, and I realized that arguing was pointless. My heart broke. The room appeared to whirl, making me sit down to avoid falling. Breathing became difficult, my heart racing as if I had just run a marathon. Convincing her now felt futile. I believed she would eventually leave in secret. I inquired urgently about the importance of this matter to her on a scale from 1 to 10. She immediately answered, 10. Closing my eyes, I hoped it was merely a nightmare. However, opening my eyes only verified the grim truth. Her quiet response when I questioned its significance over our relationship loudly declared our marriage was in peril. "Leave now, and I'll initiate divorce proceedings," I declared. She turned to me, amused, stating her friends advised her I would be responsible for paying her alimony indefinitely after our divorce, allowing her to pursue relationships freely. Hearing a car horn outside, she hurriedly left, stating that no individual man could fulfill her desires, but she would make it up to me, demonstrating how little she regarded my feelings. Distraught, I cried in the shower, then left, leaving behind my wedding ring and a note about pursuing an annulment on Monday, unwilling to grovel or vie for affection while she acted like a call girl without the decency to charge. By Monday, mockery ensued as she showed up at work sporting clear hickey marks, and soon she would discover she contracted herpes. At the water cooler, she boasted about her adventures to her co-workers in full detail, aggravating me further since she never engaged in oral sex with me, implying she sought satisfaction from multiple men. I submitted my resignation to my employer and departed, determined to avoid her except at the annulment proceedings. She seemed content with the dissolution of our marriage, convinced I obstructed her outlandish goal of engaging with the entire Philadelphia Eagles to fulfill her fantasies. Yet she became furious upon learning from the judge that our brief 6-month marriage entitled her to no alimony against her friend's advice. The judge had to threaten her with contempt and jail before she stopped her outburst, yet my spouse protested against his decision. Despite my innate tendency for revenge, influenced by my mother's Sicilian heritage, I never entertained the idea of retaliating against her. The self-destruction she was courting was far worse than any revenge I could devise. I spent many nights with a whiskey in hand, trying to make sense of the changes in my wife and my life. Her shift from one extreme to another baffled me completely. None of it made any sense. Months later, I found myself on a date with a new woman, meeting in a church as it felt like a safe place to meet a moral, upright woman. I wasn't looking for someone I'd meet in a bar. She was appealing, with jet black hair and an ordinary build similar to mine. I wasn't looking for a supermodel but hoped to find love once more. Once bitten, twice shy, as the saying goes. I told her about friends in an open relationship, asking for her stance. She smiled, saying monogamy wasn't natural to her, understanding and unthreatened by the idea of an open marriage. Glad that I shared her view, as we live in a progressive time with modern values and morals. I preferred traditional values, so I quietly drove her home, deciding I didn't want this in my life once more. What's with women today? Some sociologists argue that women have always been this way but were limited by pregnancy fears. Birth control pills changed everything, leading many women to feel liberated from old fears and traditional morals. 2 years later, she came to my apartment offering forgiveness for ending our marriage if we got back together. I laughed at the suggestion. Then she started begging for me to take her back. Even though she didn't appear to be expecting, her reaction to my inquiry about her pregnancy was to cry. Caitlin, who had recently become my wife, walked up and hugged me from behind. Ashamedly, I admit I smiled as I closed the door, never to see her again. Mutual friends later told me. She terminated the pregnancy and started to amass a number of conquests that surpassed even Jack the Ripper by making her rounds at the local bars every weekend. On certain evenings, she was passed around more than a joint at a cannabis social. Roughly 2 years afterward, I encountered her stepmother while shopping for groceries. She shared with me that she had an epiphany and stopped her reckless behavior. She had moved 1,000 miles away, incredibly, with her biological father, which took me by surprise. My blunt inquiry as to why she essentially banned her from her own house was met with laughter. She explained her actions were in response to learning about the sexual relationship between her and her father that began when she was 13. Turns out I'm not the evil stepmother, she noted. It was all news to me. I feel like the biggest fool alive, I admitted. We're in the same boat, she agreed. I had thought my husband had overcome his obsession with his daughter after so long, but I was wrong. They had been secretly meeting behind our backs for years. Thankfully, we had no children together. That's exactly my sentiment, I said. If there was a jeopardy category for knowing your spouse, I would have missed every question. It was a harsh but enlightening realization that my book learning was of no use when it came to understanding love, romance, and marriage. I was utterly clueless on these topics. Nina's stepmother mentioned that therapy helped her recover her sanity and suggested it could do the same for me. While I considered her suggestion, I ultimately felt it unnecessary. I had moved past my feelings for Nina, which was true, but the pain she caused me was permanent, despite a short-lived 6-month marriage. I always found online stories of long-married wives suddenly informing their husbands of their intention to cheat, expecting acceptance, hard to believe. The thought that a spouse could be so unreasonable or a husband so compliant seemed far-fetched unless under duress. It was hard to imagine any husband being unaware of such deceit. They had to be incredibly naive. I dismissed such stories until I lived through it myself. Now, I understand that as women age and change, not only do their desires halve, but their wisdom appears to shrink as well. Apparently, my intelligence diminished over time too, because similar to those unsuspecting husbands, I was taken by surprise by what happened. I thought Caitlin and I were happy, or at least I was. She didn't spend nights out or go on trips without me. There were no secretive calls late at night, nor were there strange clothes or hidden contraceptive packages. The only sign of trouble was my wife's excessive spending. She squandered every dime I made on extravagant purchases like new furniture, a swimming pool, a Mercedes, and plenty of jewelry, ignoring my pleas for restraint. The house and its mortgages were in her name, not mine. It seemed her way of coping with menopause was through lavish spending, while I buried myself in work for solace. Caitlin and I crossed paths in Atlantic City 6 months after my marriage ended. I was working the night shift as a soda jerk at Hi Hat Joe's Diner on the boardwalk, awaiting the start of the fall semester at Temple University. Caitlin ordered a birch beer, and distracted by her lightly dressed appearance, I accidentally overfilled the glass, leading to a spill. We shared laughter, and her playful comments about my attractiveness mentioned her plan to be at the beach near the Ambassador Hotel the following day. As promised, she was there, and I placed my blanket next to hers. I soon observed that the tinier the bikini, the steeper its cost, indicating hers was quite expensive. Completely mesmerized, I was again drawn to her enticing figure that seemed to challenge gravity. Her glance towards the noticeable tent in my swimming attire was met with a smile. The intensity of my desire felt as though it could rip through my bathing suit. Sporting a summer-long tan, she praised my skin tone and requested I apply sunscreen on her back while her companions enjoyed the ocean. In a teasing manner, I expressed my reluctance to ever release her, which she welcomed warmly. Post-divorce, I had not been close to someone, and she mentioned a solitary encounter post-prom high school event, which seemed cliché to me, yet I kept my thoughts to myself. Our physical relationship began on our second outing, with her leading our dance of intimacy and me quickly yielding, humorously indicating my submission by the symbolic white flag of my underwear. Subsequently, we lived in separate towns in Pennsylvania, about 20 miles apart, but converged at Temple University in Philadelphia during the fall. She aimed for a bachelor's degree, and I, supported by my parents, sought a master's in secondary education, growing disillusioned with the pretense and people in the advertising world. She stayed in a campus dorm, while I rented an apartment a block from the school. Matching my sexual appetite, our love-making sessions occurred twice a day, every day for the next 3 years, except for a week I was ill with the flu, during which she made me chicken soup each night. It remains a wonder how we managed our academic responsibilities alongside our passionate engagements to graduate. I felt like the luckiest man alive. Caitlin ignored the multitude of men who followed her with puppy-like devotion in the Mitten Hall cafeteria, desiring her attention and affection. Her schedule simply didn't allow it. After graduation, we both taught at a high school in Abington, Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia, often walking the halls hand in hand, amusing our students and annoying the principal. Our journey took us to Los Angeles when I participated in Jeopardy. Despite a strong performance, the champion outplayed me with $30,000 against my $10,000. However, I earned her father's deeper respect, also a Jeopardy enthusiast. Saving diligently for 3 years, Caitlin's father then completed our down payment for a house, stipulating it be in my wife's name, and I joined his firm, leaving teaching behind. We were soon blessed with 3 children. 5 years later, with her father's sudden demise, I took over the family business, a demanding role managing almost 100 employees. I improved our net profit by 8% in 2 years, despite the toll of hard work. I chose not to let my life be solely about business or amassing wealth, despite feeling trapped. I gave up hobbies like kayaking and fishing, and skipped social outings for drinks with friends, focusing all my free time on my family, my entire world. My fidelity never wavered, nor did I flirt with others. While still able to recognize beauty in others, I never thought to jeopardize my marriage or hurt my wife. When I ran into Bonnie at a supermarket, the first encounter since our childhood camp days where we shared mutual affection and parting cheek kisses, she was still delightful, clearly showing she found me just as appealing. Our dialogue was abruptly cut short in under 60 seconds when Caitlin fiercely stepped in, halting my fleeting re-engagement. After we got back, she strongly voiced her envy. For my birthday once, my kids presented me with The Godfather movie poster, quoting Michael Corleone's advice to Fredo about not going against the family. This quote became our family's guiding principle. Working long hours overtime led me to put on approximately 20 pounds, and my hairline began to thin. With no time for the gym, my physical appearance suffered. I admit to neglecting my health. My life was confined to work and family duties. My wife kept up with a gym schedule 3 times a week and put on about 5 pounds since our teenage years, yet she always thought of herself as overweight. Consequently, our sexual life slowed down to once or twice a week, eventually becoming weekly, and after 25 years, reduced to less than once a month. I yearned for more, but Caitlin suddenly felt differently, blaming it on hormonal problems. I suggested she consult a doctor, but she refused. When I brought up the idea of couples therapy, she just scoffed. There was a moment when, trying to excite her by moving my hand up her nightgown, she screamed at me, accusing me of trying to violate her. She threatened to have me arrested if I tried anything like that again. Shocked by her claim, I then avoided any attempts at initiating sex or even trying to kiss or hold her hand, fearing a misinterpretation might unjustly put me behind bars without evidence. My wife seemed unaware of my complete cessation of physical affection. At first I thought she might be going through a mental health issue and urged her to get psychological help, but it was futile. Briefly, I entertained the thought of her cheating and checked her phone, which was unlocked, a good sign. Her call logs seemed ordinary, mainly connections with her family, my office, and friends. It never occurred to me she could have a secret second phone. I stopped worrying about an affair, recognizing my simplicity and overconfidence in her. Caitlin was the only woman besides my first wife whom I dated more than once, the only one I had been physically intimate with and truly loved. I held on to hope that her hormonal issues, as she pointed out, were temporary and would eventually self-correct. I wished for our bond to return to its previous warmth, unable to imagine life without the Caitlin I once adored, not the changed person I now shared my life with as if she were a stranger. I resisted the urge to install cameras or listening devices in our house or her car, afraid it might destroy what was left of our relationship if she found out. Later, my wife apologized for her previous arrest threat, baffled by her own overreaction. While I felt some relief, I stayed cautious about making physical contact. I started to believe the problem was more psychological than about cheating. Our evening routine of watching Jeopardy after dinner continued, but now, if I got an answer wrong, she would mock me, suggesting it was the reason for my failure on the show, revealing a nastiness and bitterness I hadn't seen in her before. 2 weeks after, our youngest son left for his first year at Penn State, pulling me aside to share his worry over Caitlin's recent withdrawal and silence, advising me to keep an eye out. He also suggested I hit the gym to get healthier, giving me a hug before he departed. With our nest now empty, Caitlin and I found ourselves beside our new pool. Funded by a substantial mortgage that stretched our budget, I planned to surprise her with tickets for a Caribbean cruise, hoping to revive the spark in our once dynamic relationship. When I tried to take her hand, she pulled away, indicating a serious talk was needed. Her calling me by my full name, abandoning affectionate nicknames, was a clear sign of trouble. She disclosed her long-term dissatisfaction and disinterest in physical closeness with me, confessing she no longer found me attractive or thrilling. My attraction to you has waned. Your age, lack of fitness, and boldness are turn-offs. I'm in search of someone younger, more vibrant, and full of life. With our children gone, there's no need for us to persist in this manner. I don't want a divorce, but I intend to continue an affair I've already begun. We'll still live under the same roof, yet our intimate connections will cease, reserved solely for my lover. I couldn't believe your infidelity, I said softly. Well, she quipped, it seems trivia games aren't. The only thing you're bad at, her words utterly deflated me. How could I have misjudged women, especially my two wives, so badly? I pondered for a moment. Are you suggesting I should look for a girlfriend if I want intimacy? She clenched her fists, her face turning red. Try that, and I'll end you, she screamed. For relief, use your own hands, yet my hands seemed better suited for something else. I envisioned wrapping them around her throat, squeezing until she stopped breathing. This thought momentarily pleased me, but I dismissed it. I vowed revenge against her and her lover, though not immediately. It required a carefully crafted plan to ensure my safety from legal repercussions, specifically avoiding prison. Suddenly, I felt dizzy. A vivid, unpleasant memory of a similar situation with my first wife surfaced. My face went pale and the room seemed to spin. Sitting down, I took deep breaths to stabilize myself. Who is he? I barely asked. That doesn't matter, she snapped. I don't want you going after him. Why would I replied. You're the one at fault here. I noticed her iPhone, grabbed it, and saw she was recording our talk. I halted the recording, checked her messages, and found a recent one to Tad Smith, my deputy general manager, about their affair. I called him with her phone. When he answered endearingly, I exploded, "Stay away from my wife or I'll make you regret it. And you're fired." This wasn't just a warning to Tad, it was a promise to myself. His interference in my life would cost him, regardless of the effort or resources needed. My anger grew, picturing myself harming Tad with each thought. After ending the call, I threatened my wife, if you're with him again, expect a brutal visit. Terrified, she wept. I went upstairs to pack, but Caitlin, now calm, confronted me, claiming control over our finances, home and business, effectively owning me. I ignored her taunts, avoiding physical retaliation which she likely desired to use against me legally. Instead, I devised a plan to turn the tables and implicate her, secretly recording our conversation. I accused her of deceit, criticizing her appearance and predicting her desirability would wane once Tad used her for her money. She reacted violently, slapping me twice. Observing the emerging red marks in a mirror, I locked myself in a bathroom, called 911 to report domestic abuse, and inflicted additional injuries on myself. When the police arrived, they found the marks and my self-inflicted injuries, solidifying my claim. She confessed to striking me only 2 times, avoiding my eyes and nose. Her confession and the evidence I presented to law enforcement led to her arrest and subsequent jailing for the rest of the weekend, during which she cried incessantly. On Monday, changes were made to my will, the beneficiary of my life insurance, and more. It was then I discovered she had emptied our joint bank accounts, forcing me to borrow money from my sibling to manage until my divorce lawyer could reclaim the portion of the funds Caitlin had withdrawn. 3 days later, her lawyer, her lover Tad Smith, and 2 menacing individuals appeared at my office, terminated my employment, confiscated my corporate credit cards, the keys to the business vehicle, and instructed me to leave the premises within 5 minutes. This action humiliated me in front of my peers, and I resolved to seek retribution against Tad and my estranged wife for this degradation. They also delivered to me divorce papers and a protective order, which required that I maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Tad and my estranged wife. Tad taunted me, claiming he was now living the prosperous life I had rightfully earned, attributing his success to his own considerable skills and arrogantly announcing his takeover as the new head. He now held the presidency and proposed to me a severance package equal to 3 months' pay provided I agree to a 5-year non-competition agreement. Had he been more astute, he might have suggested a full year's pay, yet I would have refused regardless. For 2 decades, I administered her family's manufacturing business without owning shares, as it was trust-owned. I was well regarded by the staff, who showed loyalty, and I had a solid reputation for fairness and integrity with our workforce, clientele, suppliers, and even rivals. I stopped at Starbucks, made 3 calls, and secured 2 job offers before finishing my coffee. I accepted a position locally and started on Thursday, joined by a number of key personnel who left my wife's firm to support me, not solely out of loyalty but also due to their dislike for Tad, knowing his lack of competence would soon lead the business to failure given his disregard for our workers, suppliers and clients, a mindset guaranteed to ruin any enterprise. My new role came with access to an on-site fitness center, and with no rush to return home to a spouse, I dedicated an hour to it daily post-work. While my hairline kept receding, my previously pronounced belly started to diminish. I wouldn't win any physique contests, but I looked quite healthy for my age of you. Supported by my children, though perhaps generously so. Distressed by the situation, our children halted communication with their mother for several months. On her calls, they simply said, "Never betray the family," before hanging up. Despite my suggestions for counseling, they refused. They were as stubborn as their mother at times. Nevertheless, following her persistent invitations, they visited her during Thanksgiving. Upon seeing Tad, they intended to leave, but he warned them, threatening to end their financial support from their mother permanently if they left. He bragged about assuming control over the family matters, frequently declaring himself as the new boss in town. I adore those kids. Before they left, my eldest daughter and youngest son cornered Tad alone and cautioned him, "Avoid dark alleyways and parking lots. After the dust settles, our dad will beat you and might even cut off your manhood, or perhaps we will." Less than a week later, Caitlin informed them that, encouraged by Tad, she had removed them from her will and would stop any financial support. My fury exceeded theirs. I obtained a burner phone and monthly called Tad at my previous home, playing I shot the sheriff without saying a word. Acquaintances still employed under Tad reported that since Thanksgiving, he had constantly been accompanied by security whenever he was in the office parking lot. The continuous warnings from my son and my relentless phone calls had clearly made him anxious. His attempt to get a restraining order against me was unsuccessful in court due to insufficient evidence. Several months afterward, I completed my divorce, receiving a significant one-time settlement from my ex-wife, which terminated any future alimony. This settlement depleted her savings completely and necessitated a bank loan for its fulfillment. I spent a fraction of this money to take my children and their significant others to Aspen for skiing and a memorable snowball fight. With each snowball thrown, I imagined hitting my ex-wife or her new partner, which was gratifying yet did nothing to lessen my anger, or thirst for vengeance rather. It amplified them. 9 months later, her business was struggling. Shortly after receiving my ex-wife's settlement, a deliberate virus attack erased her company's computer files, including those stored off-site. Critical data such as tax records, accounts receivable, and payable were lost forever. In dire need of cash and unable to pay their suppliers, those partnerships ended. The earlier actions of Tad had not helped his case. The IRS, noticing 3 months of unpaid employee taxes, audited them and froze their bank accounts. The $10,000 I paid a Russian hacker to undermine my foes proved to be an excellent investment. The financial ruin this caused her was more devastating than any physical harm. Forced to liquidate assets to make ends meet, she sold her house and her Mercedes-Benz. She and her despicable boyfriend were now living in a cramped apartment in a declining neighborhood. I used my pension funds and a third party to purchase our former residence from the bank at a significant discount. I felt this was fair, given my contributions to the home's improvements. It became my stronghold after being forced out by my wife. I also repurchased her Mercedes from the dealer. Regarding her company, I acquired it for a steal. I generously paid a tech specialist to restore the company's files from my private backup, a straightforward but ostensibly challenging task to avoid legal issues. I personally re-established connections with each client, earning praise and hearing about my successors' failures. Bills were sent out promptly and payments started coming in again. I personally handed checks to each supplier, who resumed their deliveries. With the help of my connections in the industry, her boyfriend was excluded and became jobless. While I never physically assaulted my ex-wife's partner, I indulged in causing him psychological and financial distress. My enjoyment of this lasted every moment. It wasn't until 2 years later, during a routine business trip, that I saw them at a self-service gas station, as Tad was filling up his aging Kia. and I was taking care of the Mercedes that once belonged to my ex-wife, I quietly signaled my assistant in my car. I snuck up to Tad and shouted boo loudly, causing him to urinate on himself. Through the window of his car, I mocked my ex, saying, "Quite the brave partner you've picked." "Seems he'll need a new pair of underwear," I joked, feeling my revenge was complete as my young bear. Attractive 25-year-old assistant joined us. Hiring her was not for her looks, which was a secondary benefit. We embraced and kissed passionately, her response more enthusiastic than expected. Afterwards, I thanked my ex, sarcastically expressing gratitude for freeing me to find someone younger and more beautiful. Tears filled my ex's eyes as I drove away in the Mercedes she once cherished. The truth was, my assistant wasn't my girlfriend but agreed to act as one in front of my ex-wife. That night, I took my assistant and her husband out for dinner at the city's most upscale restaurant, including her mother, Vivian, a widow who was quite charming and funny and taught ethics at a local college. Vivian's company convinced me she was reliable, unlike my former partners. Vivian and myself aren't legally united or living together on a regular basis, but we do enjoy every weekend at my residence, unless we're partaking in our annual skiing and snowball throwing holiday in Aspen with her offspring and mine. My youngest child playfully captures images of me in the arms of my still legally bound assistant, feigning she's my partner, and forwards them to his mum. My yearning for reprisal should have been satisfied, yet it remained unfulfilled. I nurtured an intense urge to physically engage with Tad. My mind was incessantly filled with such thoughts, aware it could lead to jail time, but I was driven to address the irritant. In the end, I chose to devise a plan rather than engage in physical aggression. It may not have been the ultimate scheme of vengeance, but then again, perfection is seldom found in life, except perhaps in the case of my offspring, who appear flawless to me. A short stay in a luxurious hotel in New York and a few calls to escort services and boxing gyms provided the needed connections. As we prepared to fly back from Aspen, I excused myself to place a call from a public phone. Hearing the results over the phone triggered such uncontrollable laughter, I worried I might embarrass myself. It had been a long time since I experienced such happiness. While my relatives and I were far away with clear alibis, Tad was caught in a hotel chamber with a beautiful woman I had compensated, along with her imposing spouse, $5,000 each to lure, trap, and physically engage with Tad. A very large individual, asserting to be her partner, barged in and aimed at Tad, especially at his lower region before the duo hastily made their way back to New York by Amtrak. Caitlin, informed of the situation, arrived next and, after seeing Tad's deeds, escalated the confrontation until her detainment. It's ill-advised. To cross my kin, my former spouse tried to reconnect with our kids and even sought monetary help from them, promising to include them back in her will, only to receive mockery due to her financial collapse. In her last resort, she appealed to me, seeking either a reunion or some financial support. After investing more than $10,000 to unravel her existence, I experienced a twinge of remorse, considering my once unconditional love for her. I handed my kids $110,000 to give to their mother, as though it came from them, not me. Astonishingly, this gesture of generosity gave me more satisfaction and resolution than any retribution on Tad ever could, almost as much. Dear listeners, I encourage you to share your views in the comments section below, and please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe.